Teen girl's boyfriend dumps her. Then, 66 years later, she receives concerning news. You've probably seen the movies. Teenage boy meets teenage girl. They go on a few small-town adventures, and soon they're lifelong sweethearts. In reality, life's a little bit different, and love is a rocky road, even for couples who were ready for a lifetime together. Frederick Paul and Florence Harvey seemed to be just that couple. From their tender teen years, they were smitten with each other. But after Frederick left town one day, it seemed all hope was lost that they'd ever see each other again. For everyone who'd known the duo in their tiny 21-family village, this came as a shock. Frederick and Florence had been young when they first met, but they'd hit it off immediately. She was 13, he was 16, and it all started at their two-room schoolhouse in 1951. In such a small school, the teens were bound to run into one another. Frederick liked Florence right away, so he began walking her home from the schoolhouse. With their paths crossed, their feelings grew quickly, and they began spending as much time as they could together. They fell deeply in love, and they struck up sweet traditions. I would flick the porch light on to say goodnight to her, and then she would flick the light in her bedroom, about 2,000 feet away. Frederick later remembered all the signs pointed to a lasting relationship. But change was coming. 2 years flew by, and love was in the air again. Frederick's sister was getting married. There was just one catch, though. Her wedding was in Nova Scotia, which was a long way away from Frederick and Florence's Canadian hometown of Wandsworth, Newfoundland. Frederick's father asked him to go walk his sister down the aisle. He'd have to leave town and temporarily leave Florence. After the wedding, Fred had planned on coming home, but his luck began running out. On the way back, he took a detour to visit his brother in Toronto, but didn't take into account his low budget. Before long, he ran out of money. Not wanting to ask his father for a loan to get home, Fred instead took a job in Toronto. He needed money, but he didn't expect how he'd get sucked into the city life. He got so used to living there, he kept pushing back his plans to return to Wandsworth, where Florence waited with a broken heart. Florence waited for an entire year. Summer came again, and she sadly left town to take a teaching course. In a cruel twist of fate, Fred, who hadn't forgotten about her, came back to visit, and got there while she was away. Thinking she'd truly moved on, Fred was also hurting from heartbreak. He decided to reluctantly do the same. Meanwhile, Florence found out that she was skilled at teaching and soon got a new job as a full-time educator. She also found new love. She met a welder named Len, and they married in 1960. She still remembered Fred fondly, but now it appeared that their old flame had blown out. Over the years, Florence and Len started a happy family together. They had 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. Fred started a family too, with a woman named Helen in Toronto, where he worked for a school board. But they never forgot about Wandsworth. In 1997, their hometown held a reunion called a Come Home Year celebration. Both Florence and Fred decided to go, and they brought their now large families. Fred and Helen, who now also had children and grandchildren by this point, were surprised to meet Florence and Len there. However, the old sweethearts didn't get to catch up much, only managing time for a quick 5-minute conversation. Afterward, they went home with their families, not thinking much of it. Time marched on, and as the golden years passed by for both couples, it was soon time to say goodbye. After 57 years of a beautiful marriage, Florence's husband Len passed away. The loneliness wasn't something she was used to. She was grateful to still have her family to spend time with, but without her longtime partner, it wasn't the same. She did her best to stay busy, and 3 years later, this led to an unusual encounter. In February 2020, the day after Valentine's Day, Florence went to visit her brother at the senior living center in Marystown that he called home. She was shocked when she got there. As it turned out, Fred's brother was living there as well. It felt like another mini hometown reunion. Fred's brother was glad to see Florence, and after they happily caught up for a bit, Florence's old flame was brought up in the conversation. She couldn't help but be curious about him, and her heart clenched when she learned what had happened in his family. Fred's wife Helen had passed away the previous autumn. The upsetting news brought a pain to Florence that she knew all too well, the shared pain of loss. Knowing the two had more than a few things in common, Fred's brother made Florence an offer to reconnect one more time. Florence hadn't known it, but Fred had thought of her too. He'd given his brother permission to share his phone number with Florence just in case they ever ran into each other. Fred hoped she'd call. but it had been such a long time he didn't think she would. It was after Valentine's, and I knew his wife had died. I was lonely, he was lonely, so I thought, well, I'll just call him and offer my condolences, I guess. Florence later said, so she did. They spoke about dealing with grief, and Florence assured Fred that it does get a little easier. It didn't take long for them to start talking about the past. The two reminisced about their youth in Wandsworth and laughed about the old memories. It was an unexpected conversation. But 2 days later, Fred found himself wanting to call her again. We started talking about our courtship years ago and all of the things that we had done together. Before you knew it, we were on the phone 3 to 4 hours at a time. For 5 months, Florence and Fred talked on the phone 4 times a week. Fred was ecstatic just to have Florence back in his life, even if it wasn't in person, but Florence had a clever surprise up her sleeve. She was planning a visit to Ontario, where Fred lived, in July that year. On the night of Fred's birthday, he waited for her to call at 10 o'clock, their usual schedule, but the phone didn't ring. Finally, a concerned Fred called her, asking if everything was all right. When she said she wasn't home or at her son's houses, he asked, "You're not in Ontario, are you?" Her answer made him leap up out of bed. "Yes, I am. I'm 10 minutes away," she said. Fred's heart nearly stopped. He ran out to draw a Welcome Florence sign on the driveway with chalk. A few minutes later, they drove in. "I gave her a kiss on the cheek and held her hand," he said. "I knew right away that she had taken my heart back again." Not even a month later, they'd moved in together and they were shopping for wedding rings. Their families were initially shocked, but for Florence and Fred, there was no point in waiting. "We do everything together. I love every moment," Florence said. Added Fred, "Florence has been like an angel from heaven. Every day I wake up and say how blessed I am." Nowadays, they're staying strong through Fred's chemotherapy together. Both Florence and Fred are looking forward to happier times ahead, and in the summer of 2021, they're hoping to return to Wandsworth to stay in Fred's brother's cottage. Their happy reunion was a dream one, and across the continent, another long-lost couple was trying to have a reunion just like it. If you spotted Janice Rood and Prentice Wilson back in the 1960s, it would have been safe to assume they were ready to spend the rest of their lives together, just like Fred and Florence. In fact, there was nothing they wanted more, but things weren't so simple. Janice came from a working-class family in Reno, Nevada. Her father encouraged her to seek a better life than the one he had, and so Janice set off to earn a degree in biology. Her father agreed to help her pay her tuition. Janice enrolled in Occidental College in the early 1960s. By her sophomore year, she was doing well in her classes and figured she had a handle on university life. But one turn of events changed it all. She fell in love. Though he was only a freshman, Prentice Wilson made an immediate splash on campus. He won the presidency of the Kappa Sigma fraternity and rebelled against its national brotherhood when they refused to admit a black student. This bold stand made Prentice hard to forget, notwithstanding the fact that he was charming and handsome. For Janice, he looked like her knight in shining armor. She worked in the school cafeteria to help pay for her education, and Prentice made a point of chatting with her every day. Both students eagerly hoped to bump into each other on campus, though they hadn't learned each other's names yet. Prentice made sure he was among the first students to enter the cafeteria every meal, just so he could have extra time to talk with Janice. After a few weeks of flirtation, he worked up the courage to ask what her name was. He never forgot it. While these brief conversations continued for months, the relationship didn't evolve beyond that. Both Janice and Prentice were clearly enamored with one another, but neither felt brave enough to suggest an actual date. Finally, Janice decided to take action. After learning that Prentice went home to spend Thanksgiving with his family, she hopped in her car and drove 160 miles to his home. She knocked on his door, but was at a total loss of words when Prentice answered. But Janice didn't need to say a word. Prentice was over the moon that his cafeteria crush suddenly showed up at his door. He invited her inside, where Janice met his parents, and even shared their Thanksgiving meal. After that fateful day, Janice and Prentice were inseparable. As their love flourished, the two students began making plans for a future. It seemed perfectly natural. Why wouldn't they be together forever? Then Prentice made a big leap. He proposed, and Janice said yes. They were never more in love than at this very moment. Little did they realize, however, that not everyone approved of their imminent marriage. Janice's father had no interest in seeing his daughter get married so young and throw away her future. He gave her an ultimatum: either leave Prentice or she would stop receiving tuition and likely never graduate. Earning a diploma meant everything to Janice. Tearfully, she broke off her engagement to keep her family ties and professional hopes intact. She and Prentice were, of course, both devastated. The ex-fiancés went their separate ways, although they would never forget each other. Prentice became a tax attorney in San Francisco, while Janice ran a successful diving board company in Seattle. Both of them married other people, though the unions later ended in divorce. Nearly 5 decades later, Janice's mother passed away. As she was going through her mother's personal effects, Janice found something totally unexpected in a purse: a newspaper clipping announcing the Rude Wilson engagement. If her mother carried it after all these years, Janice realized her romance with Prentice must have really meant something. The tricky part was that Janice barely made any contact with Prentice in the years following graduation. Now she couldn't get him out of her head. Was she crazy to still be thinking about her old flame after almost 50 years? Through the grapevine, Janice learned that Prentice was essentially in the same boat she was. Not only had his mother recently passed away, but he too was divorced. It seemed like fate. Hoping for a miracle, Janice gave him a call. Just like when Janice showed up on Prentice's doorstep on Thanksgiving, she was reaching out to him out of the blue. As luck would have it, he was once again elated to find Janice checking in on him, and Prentice had one more remarkable coincidence to share. His mother also carried around the newspaper clipping about their engagement during all of those years apart. It seemed like a sign. Within 2 months, these star-crossed lovers were engaged to be married for the second time. This time around, however, nobody could stand in Prentice's and Janice's way. They finally married each other in 2012 on Occidental College's campus, surrounded by old friends and classmates. The couple regrets that they had to spend so much time away from one another, but they're now more focused on what's ahead. These days, Janice and Prentice are always driving off to some new adventure, and no road is off limits.